the beginning of Russia's full-scale attack on Ukraine, Howard G. Buffett has been a dedicated advocate and supporter of the Ukrainian people, committing more than $500 million from the Howard G. Buffett Foundation. And with me is Howard Buffett to talk about your trip. You were just there in December. Interesting, you spent your birthday, Christmas, and New Year's in Ukraine. So bring us up to date. I feel like what's going on in Israel and Gaza has kind of replaced Ukraine in the news. So what did you see on the ground there?
So I think you're correct. I think there's several things going on that, including our own political environment, the situation happening here at home, have kind of displaced a lot of the news on Ukraine. And it's one of those situations where I think, not getting the attention hurts Ukraine. It gives some space for those who are against our support in Ukraine to kind of step it up. I don't think people realize how much the Russian propaganda machine is working in this country to try to undermine our support for Ukraine. So it gives a little more space to that as well. So it's tough. And the situation there is one where, Ukraine needs our support, and there's good reasons to support Ukraine. And if we don't get this next package through, and if Europe, the EU doesn't get their next package through, which they only have one country holding it up, then I think it's going to have a significant impact on how things turn out.
You mentioned Russian propaganda. So, because it does feel like things shifted a little bit in terms of sentiment. I mean, was this social media? How can people know? How can people know the truth and what's happening?
No, it's really hard. It's really hard to know. I mean, I get text messages from some of my longtime friends, and like one of them I remember was like, "Well, look, Zelensky just bought this yacht," and I said, you can't just believe that. And I said, why would he be doing that? And then there was a story that came out, a couple of stories in where they did some investigative reporting, and it came back to actually a source of Russian propaganda that had put that story out. And of course, it was not a real story, and Zelensky did not buy a yacht. And but it was timed perfectly, because one of the reasons that it came out when it did was that it was when the big debate was going on. And all it does is it creates a little extra doubt with people who believe things on the face value. And it also gave those in Congress who don't want to support Ukraine another argument. So the timing actually did hurt the debate.
Well, and if it affects public sentiment, they may speak to their congressperson or their senator, and that may influence a vote. And so it does have real world implications for people.
It does. Yeah, it does. And the narrative, it's interesting how the narrative develops, because you have people talking about, well, we have sent billions of dollars to Ukraine. The truth is, we've sent some billions to Ukraine, but a lot of that money has stayed here in the United States. If you Blinken had a press conference about not even a month ago at the end of the year, and he talked about how 90% of all of the military support is in the United States. I mean, we have spent that rebuilding our defense industry. It's American jobs. American Enterprise Institute did a great, very detailed study into where it was, and they found, it's in 31 states, 71 cities, and they got very detailed about it. And so, a huge amount of the money that we're spending to support Ukraine is spent right here in the United States, supporting U.S. jobs. And additionally, it is clearing out old U.S. weapons, which as high as 40% of them are ineffective in the field because they've sat around for so many years. And then as we replace the weapon systems, it's giving us the opportunity to replace them with upgraded, better weapon systems. So there's a lot of advantages in the United States, and you don't hear that. You just don't hear that talked about very much.
No, this is the first I've heard it, actually. So, yeah, and I watch the news a lot. So let's talk about your project. So is this your, second, third trip to Ukraine, or?
No, this was my 10th trip.
What? You mean since the Russian?
I snuck in a few times since I've seen you.
Oh, okay. Okay. So what are the current immediate needs, would you say?
Well, the current immediate needs are long-range missiles, and that's not to hit Russia. That's to hit Russian supply lines in occupied Ukrainian area, which is a very important distinction to make. Long-range missiles and aircraft, both helicopters and and planes. I mean, I always use this example, which in the Gulf War, the United States flew 100,000 sorties over 5 weeks and dropped 88,000 tons of bombs before we sent a tank forward or any military personnel forward. And if you ask any general in this country, they're going to tell you they don't want to fight a war without air superiority. Russia has air superiority. They also had 7 months to put together a very extensive defensive strategy and physical barriers, landmines, trenches, anti-tank trenches, dragon teeth. All of that is in place now because they got the break between the end of 22 to kind of the spring of 23. So they've had this opportunity to really bulk up their defenses, and they have air superiority. So what Ukraine has to have are long-range missiles, more ammunition, adequate amounts of ammunition, and then they have to be able to establish air superiority. So they need planes and helicopters.
Mm-hmm. And the U.S. has helped, and you mentioned Europe as well, but they're still debating some help, or
well, yeah. So the EU, there's one country that is holding it up, Hungary. Otherwise, they would have passed a 50-some billion euro package, which is really critical for Ukraine. Of course, here politically, they've hung up the $61 billion package with the debate on the southern border,
yeah.
Which they're just trying to use as leverage. Which politically, you understand that. I mean that's you get why they're doing it, but it's incredibly damaging to Ukraine. And so both those packages are really needed, and they're needed now. Because I always say we've given Ukraine enough to fight and die, but we haven't given them enough to fight and win. And so that's not a strategy. And we should care about them winning. I mean, they're fighting three of our largest enemies. They're fighting Russia, Iran, and North Korea. Iran is giving them thousands and thousands of drones. They're helping them build a drone plant in Russia. North Korea is sending trainloads of ammunition. They're giving them ballistic missiles now, which are, for the first time, they've been able to prove are being used in Ukraine against Ukrainian civilian targets, not military targets. And so when you look at that, it's just, you have to ask yourself, if they're fighting three of the largest enemies we have in the world who want to see America fail, who want to see democracy fail, who want to see Americans suffer, why would we hesitate to help Ukrainian fight our own enemies? That I don't understand.
Well, and you mentioned Iran, and we know they're involved in the Israel-Gaza situation, which I want to ask you about too in a second. But let's talk a little bit more about Ukraine first. So you have several projects there, food related. How is that situation? Are people getting the meals and the food that they need, the basic necessities?
There's quite a lot of support going into food-related support and water support. But, since the beginning of the war, we've provided over 160 million meals, whether that's, direct meals for refugees going out of the country in the beginning, whether that was food kits, food boxes, whatever you want to call them, to the front line. So that need is going to continue. I don't think it can get everywhere it's needed. I mean, on the front line, Russian drones are attacking any kind of convoy. They're attacking ambulances with drones. So when you show up for a food distribution, you have to keep it small and quick. And then some areas are just getting harder to access because of how aggressive Russia's getting. So I don't think everybody's getting the food they need. I think everybody's doing, everything they can and doing a pretty good job of it, but it's just really hard to reach everybody. And then, of course, one of the other big areas that we're focused on not is just, both agriculture, but also demining. We have equipment that we supplied to farmers who have lost equipment and who can't afford to buy equipment now. And we have harvested something like 250,000 acres, if I remember right, planted about 150,000 acres. So that makes a difference. I mean, it's it's a dent, but it's a big dent. I mean, it's not, it's certainly not. We can't reach everybody that needs it, but we have helped a lot of farmers, and we're getting a lot of acres demined.
And you and I both have farm backgrounds, so I understand what it takes to get that done. I can't even imagine getting a combine over to Ukraine. Like, how you?
We have 70 combines in the country. We have 84 tractors. We have a lot of planters and drills. And the big challenge, of course, is logistics, getting them moved all over the country. November 1st, I got a text on November 1st, one that I hope never to get. I knew I could get it. but one of the combines we supply through Victory Harvest, the farmer hit a landmine, uh,
Mm.
completely destroyed the combine. He was injured, but they got him medical attention quickly. So, he's going to be okay. But, that's the reality of farming in Ukraine is it's dangerous. It's really dangerous.
Now, there were some food train projects also that you help sponsor. So tell me about those.
Yeah, that's a really cool project. So the railroad has provided incredible leadership through the entire war. I mean, they moved millions of people, to the west when you've had something like 8+ million refugees that have left the country. They moved supplies to the west, but what they did is they came up with this idea. They said, we want to create a food train, so we have everything that's self-contained on a train and we can go feed people across the front line. And that's what they're doing. And I got a chance to see that a couple different times on this last trip. And, it's really amazing. They have generators on the train. They have these kitchens in a couple different train cars. They can cook something like 14,000 meals, in a week. Or it may be 14,000 meals a day. I can't remember, but I mean, it's like this huge number, right? I mean, it's like a lot of meals. And so they go from one place to the other. And they have to move quick, and it's just like you're constantly avoiding
Mm.
anything that Russia will do. I mean, they hit the Kramatorsk train station a year or so ago and killed 50 or 60 people. They used cluster munitions on civilians there. So they hit I think it was a Kherson train station just a few weeks ago. I mean, they've hit the train stations and tracks and bridges. There's a few hundred train bridges that are knocked out, so they have to rework their routes and all that, but they get around and they've gotten to the front line. They've fed a lot of people, a lot of kids come, and it's really cool to see it because it's just a different way of getting food out to people who need it.
And it just feels like that you can't relax for just a moment in Ukraine because you just don't know. Like if
Oh,
there.
you don't know. I mean, like, and Russia has stepped this up. I mean, every day since Christmas, basically, they have been sending missiles in, and now what they're doing is they're sending multiple missiles, dozens of missiles in at one time, so that they can penetrate the air protection that they have, like in Kyiv, and then Kharkiv doesn't really have any real air protection. So they've killed something. I mean, guessing at this, kind of adding it up in my head as I think about it, but they've killed several hundred people in the last, couple of weeks. They've injured much more than that. They've killed a lot of children. And this is just the last few weeks. I mean, this is happening daily now. I mean, they hit a hotel in Kharkiv where they injured a couple of BBC correspondents, and I mean, they're getting really bold, and they've stepped it up quite a bit.
I was just going to ask that. Do you feel like Russia feels like they're emboldened because our attention is somewhere else and the propaganda and kind of this division in the US about what to do? You feel like they sense that and they're kind of seizing the moment?
Yeah, anybody who knows Putin, I mean, just study Putin for a short time and you understand him. I mean, he is a guy who preys on weakness. And, McCain said once, not to provoke Putin will 100% provoke Putin because he'll see it as weakness. And so he sees everything we're doing. We're playing into Putin's hand 100% right now. I mean, he sees everything we're doing as weakness. The EU won't pass a package. The US won't pass a package. We have not given Ukraine what they've asked for. They've been asking for F-16s for a year and a half. Some of the European countries now are going to give them to them. The US has failed to do it. And so they understand they're going to maintain air superiority. Ukraine has been able to degrade that a little bit, but not significantly. But I think the frustrating thing is to watch the discussion, because let's go back to the beginning. Ukraine repelled Russia when they came in through Chernihiv and Kyiv, and they repelled them in an amazing fight, because people just thought Kyiv was going to fall within days, and then Ukraine would fall within another month, and it didn't happen. And then in 2022, they pushed Russians out of something like 50% of the territory that they had occupied, which is amazing if you think about it. They're fighting the second most powerful military in the world, and they pushed them back. Then they kind of hit a roadblock because of the weather. It gave Russia a chance to put in all these defensive measures that they put in over the winter, And so when they came in, in the spring of 23, Russia had this extensive network of barriers set up, including landmines and trenches and anti-tank trenches, all these things that they set up. And Russia still had air superiority. So it was very difficult for Ukraine to make much progress. But still, fighting as they're fighting, they have, with a much more aggressive approach with Russia, they've pretty much stopped them from gaining really any significant territory. They pushed the Navy, the Russian Navy, pretty much out of the Black Sea by some really clever use of drones and water drones and a few long-range shadow missiles. They've been very successful in things. They opened up the grain corridor again, the humanitarian grain corridor, because they were able to push Russia out of the Black Sea. So all these narratives get lost. I mean, people don't talk about what they've accomplished; they talk about what they haven't accomplished. And if you think about what Ukraine has accomplished in the last couple of years, it's truly amazing.
Yeah.
And they've done it without our full support. Of course, we've supported them. Of course, the Europeans have supported them, but we haven't given them what they need to win.
And it feels like it's just prolonging and dragging out instead of kind of just, helping them and getting it taken care of it instead of.
Well, think about it this way. In 2022, if we had given Ukraine what they needed and they had really pushed Russia back, what's happened since then? They have established a very close relationship with Iran. They have developed a relationship with North Korea sending them trainloads of ammunition and ballistic missiles to use against civilian targets in Ukraine. Those things may not have developed if we had given Ukraine what they needed in 2022. So the longer we drag it out, two things happen. One is Russia regains its ability to fight stronger, and the humanitarian crisis just grows. And so, that means, the reason why I talk so much about what the war is and what has to happen in the war is because until you end the war, you can't end the humanitarian crisis. And so we just keep spending more money, and a lot of that money is directed at Ukraine. It means that money and our money and other people's money, USAID and other foundations and NGOs, they aren't spending money somewhere else in the world that needs it.
Yeah. So Israel and Gaza, are you doing any work there?
We have never worked in the Middle East.
Okay.
So I feel like, and part of the reason, to be honest with you, is, we were so engaged in Africa, and we still are. We're very engaged in Central and South America. Colombia is a big area where we work, where there's a lot of conflict. We've worked a lot in Congo and Sudan and Burundi and places where there's conflict in Africa. So we've been very engaged in that. And of course, we would never have thought about that we would be engaged in Ukraine until the war came, because they would have never needed anything that we would have been able to provide. So the Middle East has been something that, it's very complicated. It's very complex. It always has been. I don't understand it all. And so for us to work there, we would need a whole other part of a staff. I couldn't spend enough time there, I don't think, to understand it. So for me, it's just been one of those areas where we've not been able to engage.
Yeah. Well, and you're right. It seems very dangerous. And I know there's been help that have gone to Gaza, for example, and you don't know exactly ends up where it needs to go. So,
well, yeah. And we don't, if you look at what we've done, and we've always done it this way, we've never given any foundation support in a country that I haven't been to, and most of the time, multiple times. Our staff goes to the countries where we work. So I feel we have to show up. We have to meet people. We have to understand the circumstances. We have to build their trust. We have to build our trust in them. So, that takes a lot of time and effort. And if you look at, I've been to Africa. I think we looked at this the other day. I've made 238 trips to international trips, and almost 100 of them to Africa. I mean, like, I couldn't add another geography. I just physically couldn't do it. So, that we just haven't been able to do it.
Yeah. Well, and there's a lot of need in the world, and I think we just appreciate what you do, and that you have the resources to do it, and the knowledge to bring to many of us here in the U.S. that don't really totally understand what's going on, since you've been on the ground. That's so valuable for us to hear your viewpoint.
That's why I've been in Ukraine 10 times, because I can't learn it and I can't understand it unless I'm there.
Right. Well, Howard, thank you so much. I look forward to your next trip and hearing about it.
Great. I look forward to seeing you again, Jean. Thank you. Bye-bye.